Hello AmericansChannel. This video is made by free videos from Storyblocks, and these images and video we use just for explanation, and it's free use also.
Ex-police dog keeps barking at past owner's coffin, revealing the secret he brought to his grave. It was a strange scene inside the church. The dog Rex appeared almost rabid as he barked relentlessly toward the coffin holding his late owner. Despite several attempts to distract him, no one dared to get too close. What did it mean? It did not appear to be an expression of Rex's grief for losing his owner. The behavior seemed too aggressive for that. Nervous glances were exchanged between the people present, with many eyes going towards Jason, the son of the deceased. "This isn't right," Jason murmured under his breath. He had suspicions about his dad's death from the minute he heard the news, but was too afraid to share them. Afraid others would think he was crazy. He'd remained silent for so long, observing people he didn't trust, now crying as they entered the funeral. To Jason, their tears seemed fake. He had spent many nights trying to convince himself it was all in his head, that it was just grief-induced paranoia. But now, as Rex, his father's former police dog, barked at the coffin, a chilling certainty took hold. "This isn't right," he whispered, his voice steadily rising with conviction. "This isn't right," he declared louder, over and over, until the murmurs around him ceased and all eyes turned his way. Unable to contain himself any longer, he shouted, "This isn't right." And with that, an eerie silence enveloped the gathering. Jason's shout made everyone freeze and turn their attention to him. He sensed every gaze: shock, sympathy, and concern. His Aunt Crystal looked at him with an expression that spoke volumes, whispering to his uncle beside her. Jason knew exactly what they were thinking. "They probably think I've lost it," he thought, looking down in embarrassment. He wished he could just disappear, leave all his problems behind like they were nothing. But that wasn't possible, and he was stuck going over the past few months in his head, again and again. Jason gazed at the coffin a few meters away, wishing he'd made different decisions. How he yearned to rewind to last summer, when his dad was still by his side. "If only I had known what was about to happen," he thought, "maybe I could have changed it." But back then, he was too caught up in his own small problems. It was summer break, and he spent those last weeks with his dad at their summer house. It was an amazing and relaxed time, just the two of them, something they hadn't done for a long time. Maybe that's what made it so special, but maybe that's also what led to all this mess. During those 2 weeks, they enjoyed incredible times together. They swam in the nearby lake and went fishing in the middle of it using his father's boat. In the evenings, they would fire up the barbecue and grill the freshly caught fish of the day. It truly was one of Jason's best summers. He felt he couldn't be happier. But on the last night, things took a turn for the worse. Jason's mind wandered back to that fateful night and, overwhelmed with embarrassment, he closed his eyes tightly. That night had altered everything, forever shifting the course for him and his father. Oh, how he wished he could rewind time, if only he had known then what he. Suddenly, his train of thought was shattered by the sharp call of his name: Jason. "Jason." Susan's voice pierced through his reverie, her hands urgently shaking his shoulders, desperately seeking his attention. Jarred back to the present, Jason's gaze met his stepmother's anxious eyes. Her face was etched with concern, or perhaps it was fear. "What's wrong, Jason? What is it?" she implored, her voice trembling slightly. But Jason's mind was a whirlwind of confusion and unresolved feelings: his father's death, the unsettling barking of Rex, and the deep-seated doubts that had haunted him for months. He wanted to say something, but he just couldn't find the right words. Suddenly, he was acutely aware of the commotion he had caused. The church was now full, and all eyes were on him. Some looked at him with pity, others with scorn. He could almost sense their thoughts. How could he shout like that at his own dad's funeral? I, he stuttered, his eyes scanning the crowd for a sympathetic face, someone who might believe the thoughts he'd been carrying for so long. But how could he explain? How could he tell them that his dad's death, the loss of their friend, colleague, and loved one, possibly wasn't just an accident? Suddenly, Susan placed her hands on his shoulders. "Jason is going through a lot," she paused. "We all are," and then she lowered her gaze. "Please forgive him for causing a scene. It's just really tough for him right now," she added in a voice that was meant to sound caring. But to Jason, it didn't come across as genuine at all. He looked around, but everyone seemed to buy those words. The eerie silence that was so deafening just minutes ago was broken by soft murmurs of understanding and nods of agreement. People's faces softened, their expressions shifting from shock to a more forgiving look. But Jason felt isolated, as if he was the only one standing in a sea of disbelief. What was she doing? Why was she trying to quiet him? Were her concerns genuine, or was she just trying to stop him from speaking out? countless thoughts raced through his mind. He knew he had to act. Now was the moment. He met Susan's gaze with a fierce look and gently pulled her hands away from his shoulders. "No, Susan," he said softly, then turned his eyes to the crowd and spoke a little louder, "this isn't just about me struggling." Yet, as he continued, he realized that everyone had already shifted their focus away from him. The opportunity had faded, clearly orchestrated by Susan. Sensing this, she grasped Jason's shoulders, whispering gently, "Let's not cause a scene, okay?" Guiding him firmly back to his seat, she then nodded to the preacher, signaling that the ceremony could proceed. As the preacher stepped forward, the church fell into a respectful hush, all eyes now turning to the front. Jason felt a surge of frustration and helplessness. He knew the truth was clawing its way out, desperate to be heard, but Susan's interference had stifled his moment. The preacher's voice, steady and comforting, began to fill the space, offering words of solace and remembrance. But to Jason, it sounded distant, almost muffled by the storm of thoughts in his head. He glanced at Rex, who had finally quieted down, lying solemnly near the coffin. The dog's silence now seemed to echo Jason's own forced silence. He had to do something. He looked at the row of police officers standing quietly behind him, all staring at the coffin with serious faces. Did they know the real story behind his dad's death? Or were they as clueless as the other mourners? His eyes moved from face to face, searching for any sign of knowledge or guilt. There had to be someone who knew the real story. But who could it be? They all looked so serious and hard to read. Jason couldn't tell who was truly upset and who might be pretending. Surely, some of them must have their own guesses about what happened, right? But how could he find out who? "Hey!" Susan whispered sharply, snapping him out of his thoughts with a quick pinch to his arm, "Stop staring." There she was again, monitoring him closely, making sure he acted just as everyone expected. She wanted to avoid any gossip or talk after the funeral. He shot Susan an annoyed look and rolled his eyes. He had never warmed up to her. From the moment she stepped into their home, he felt like she was an outsider. It had been almost 9 years since his mother's passing, yet Susan's entry into their lives just 3 years ago felt too soon, too raw for Jason. He just couldn't see how his dad could love another woman after his mom. His memories of his mother were filled with warmth, kindness, and affection. Closing his eyes, he felt a tear coming on. He had lost his mom before, and now with his dad gone too, he felt completely alone. There was no one left who loved him like they did, especially not Susan. But there was more. Jason couldn't shake the feeling that Susan had an ulterior motive for being so overly attentive now, especially at the funeral. Can it somehow be connected to the secrets I uncovered earlier this summer? He wondered, clenching his fists as he thought back on it. Suddenly, a loud bark from Rex, his dad's former police dog, snapped him out of his thoughts. The dog had wriggled free from the leash held by one of the officers from his dad's unit and dashed up to the coffin. There, he barked fiercely, almost as if he was desperately trying to communicate something. The church, once a sanctuary of solemn silence, now echoed with Rex's frantic barks, slicing through the air like an urgent cry for truth. Jason's heart raced as he watched the dog, his father's loyal companion, circle the coffin with an intense energy that demanded attention. Each bark seemed to echo the questions swirling in Jason's mind, the secrets that lay just beneath the polished wood surface. The officers, caught off guard, scrambled to restrain Rex, but the dog's determination was palpable, an embodiment of the questions that tormented Jason's soul. The mourners, all in black and with serious faces, watched with both alarm and curiosity. This was more than just a disturbance. It was a revealing moment. The dog's loud barking seemed to express the same doubts and questions Jason had in his mind. The quiet calm of the church was broken, filled now with a tense, charged feeling. Each of Rex's loud barks and quick movements matched the storm of feelings inside Jason, making him more determined. The way Rex acted showed the same kind of upset and unanswered questions that Jason felt deep down. Jason felt the church's heavy, stale air fill his lungs, the scent of old wood and incense mingling with the tension. The air seemed thick with the crowd's curiosity and unease, almost as if he could taste it. Amidst this, the dog's barks echoed deeply within him, awakening a whirlwind of emotions that he struggled to control. With every nerve in his body on edge, Jason took a step forward, his patience frayed to its limits. A surge of frustration and grief broke free from within him. "Open the coffin," he shouted, his voice reverberating against the stone walls and stained glass, filling the church. "We have to see the truth. We can't ignore this." The crowd gasped, the officers froze, and even Rex's barking paused for a moment as Jason's declaration hung in the air. "Jason." Susan exclaimed, her voice filled with shock. "What are you saying? Are you out of your mind?" She covered her mouth with her hand, showing exaggerated surprise, as if his statement was completely absurd. Then, astonishingly, her reaction took an unexpected turn. For a brief moment, she simply stared at him. Her eyes blinked in bewilderment. Then, as if a switch had been flipped, her expression shifted, and a glint appeared in her eyes, signaling a sudden idea. "Oh, Jason," she said, her voice dripping with feigned concern. She opened her arms and pulled him into a tight, prolonged embrace. Jason just stood there, confused and uneasy. What was she up to? What was happening? Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, she let go and held his shoulders, gazing into his eyes with an overly affectionate look. "You'll be okay," she reassured him. "Do you understand? I'll make sure you get the help you need." Then, turning to the gathered crowd with a sorrowful expression, she announced, "I'm afraid Jason's condition is worse than I thought. But don't worry, I'll ensure he receives the proper care." Jason felt a mix of anger and disbelief. Is she trying to discredit me in front of everyone? To make my words seem like the ramblings of a distressed son? He knew he had to stay strong and find a way to reveal the truth, no matter how Susan tried to manipulate the situation. He realized this was the moment to confront the truth, no matter how daunting it may be. Gathering his courage, Jason looked around at the solemn faces, their eyes now fixed on him with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. "Someone is not being honest here," he announced, his voice firmer than he felt. Surprised murmurs quickly spread among the crowd, growing louder as people asked for more details. In just minutes, the previously quiet group became noisy and agitated. People who had been whispering to each other were now turning to Jason, looking for answers. Jason paused, unsure. He wondered if he should really go further. He hadn't said too much yet. There was still time to back out. He looked around at the people in the old creaky church. He saw family members, his stepmother, his dad's friends and family of his stepmother, and the police officers his dad had worked with for almost 30 years. Seeing their tears and sad faces, Jason shook his head. He wished he could forget everything he knew. Maybe that would make things easier. But then he shook his head. No, everyone deserves to know the truth. He was sick of seeing all the fake tears and pretend caring. He believed that if there hadn't been so many lies, his dad might still be here. So he cleared his throat and faced the crowd. He took a deep breath and spoke with strong confidence. "The story you've all heard about my dad's death." He paused for a moment, making sure he had everyone's attention. Just then, he saw Calvin, one of his father's colleagues, quickly moving through the crowd toward him. As Calvin got close, Jason quickly said, "It's all a lie." Just before Calvin reached out and firmly grabbed his arm. Calvin's grip was firm and urgent, but Jason's resolve was unshakable. "What are you doing, Calvin?" Jason demanded, his voice carrying a mixture of confusion and anger. The officer, a man who had been like an uncle to him, had a grave expression on his face, one that Jason had never seen before. "Jason, we need to talk now," Calvin whispered urgently, his eyes darting around the room, assessing the reactions of the crowd. He tugged Jason slightly away from the center, towards a quieter corner of the church. Reluctantly, Jason followed, his mind racing with questions and suspicions. As they stepped away, the murmurs of the crowd grew louder, a cacophony of confusion and curiosity filling the air. Jason's stepmother watched them go, her eyes wide with a fear that seemed to know more than it let on. Once out of earshot, Calvin released his grip and faced Jason. "Listen, Jason, I know you're hurting, and I know you have your suspicions, but you need to be careful with your accusations. This is bigger than you realize," Calvin said, his voice low and serious. Jason's heart pounded. "What do you mean, Calvin? What are you not telling me?" he demanded, his frustration growing. The pieces of the puzzle were there, but they just wouldn't fit together. The murmurs from the crowd grew louder, a mix of speculation and impatience. Jason realized they couldn't speak freely here any longer. He needed answers, and he needed them now. "Open the coffin," Jason said abruptly, turning to face the crowd, his voice steady and more commanding than before. "We need to see if there's anything else that can tell us what really happened." The crowd erupted into a frenzy of whispers and gasps. The preacher, looking bewildered and concerned, stepped forward. "My son, this is highly unusual and disrespectful. We cannot." But before he could finish, an authoritative voice rang out. "Do it," commanded Chief Harrison, the head of the police department and an old friend of Jason's father. The room fell silent, all eyes on the chief as he approached the coffin. "If there's a chance this could give us answers about Tom's death, then we need to pursue it." With a nod from the preacher, two officers stepped forward and carefully opened the coffin. The church held its breath as the lid was lifted, revealing the peaceful, yet hauntingly still, form of Jason's father. But that was not all. Rex, who had been quietly lying near the coffin, suddenly stood up, his ears perked, and let out a low, mournful howl. Jason's heart ached as he watched the scene unfold, the dog's loyalty and pain palpable in the air. While the officers were searching, one stopped and hesitated, his hand shaking a bit as he reached into the jacket pocket of Tom, Jason's father. Carefully, he took out a napkin, making Jason's heart race. The officer unfolded it, showing a dark, questionable stain. "This could be poison," he said in a low voice, almost drowned out by the shocked silence of the crowd. The room quickly became noisy and chaotic, with people asking questions, making accusations, and expressing their disbelief all at once. In the midst of this confusion, Jason stood still, focusing intently on the napkin that might hold the answer to his father's death. Who could have wanted to harm such a well-respected man? And why? Jason looked over the crowd, his eyes moving across the many surprised faces, trying to spot any sign of guilt or remorse. He had always had a nagging feeling about his father's death, a suspicion that he couldn't shake off. But to find out it might be true? And involving poison? This new information was both shocking and completely unforeseen. He observed the murmurs and whispered speculations around him. Hushed conversations gradually grew into fervent debates, eyes darting with suspicion. Jason's gaze shifted back to the officers, their expressions stoic and inscrutable. What secrets were they hiding? Then, his eyes landed on Susan, her face ghostly white as she paced restlessly. Jason had thought he grasped the situation, but now, he was drowning in a sea of questions. The air was heavy with doubt and distrust. Who could he believe? Trust seemed impossible now. And as the crowd's whispers grew, it was clear they were starting to suspect something was off too. Suddenly, Chief Harrison, who had been quietly whispering with the preacher, stepped forward, his voice cutting through the noise. "This funeral is postponed until further notice," he announced. "We have a potential crime to investigate. I urge everyone to remain calm and cooperate with the authorities." The crowd began to trickle out, and even Susan left the church. For the first time since the ceremony started, she wasn't watching Jason. Lost in her thoughts, she left the church, muttering to herself. Jason watched her closely, trying to figure out what she was saying. He focused on her lips, looking for clues, but she quickly vanished into the crowd before he could understand anything. Determined for answers, Jason felt the urgency weighing on him. This uncertainty was unbearable. Instead of joining the crowd and leaving the church, he turned back and approached the police officers. They were in the midst of a frenzied discussion, clearly caught off guard by the recent developments. Amidst the chaos, voices overlapped as everyone spoke at once, not allowing others to finish their thoughts. They were all eager to find answers, animatedly debating their next steps. However, Calvin was the exception. Standing about a meter away from the group, he was quietly staring at the ground, thoughtfully scratching his beard repeatedly. Jason cleared his throat, attempting to catch their attention. "You need to look into Susan," he said, his voice firm yet tinged with hesitation. The officers' conversation paused, their eyes turning towards him with a mix of surprise and skepticism. "Jason, you're just upset," one officer said dismissively, misinterpreting his insistence as grief. "We understand, but this isn't the time for baseless accusations." Jason bit his lip, struggling with the desire to reveal more. He wanted to tell them about the secrets he'd uncovered last summer, about his deep-seated suspicions regarding Susan. But divulging that would mean exposing his own actions, his own secrets. He wasn't ready for that, not yet. So there he stood, his request ignored as the officers quickly went back to their discussion. Jason was left wondering what to do next. He stared at the officers who had seemed to have forgotten about him, just like that. His gaze shifted back to Calvin. Their eyes met briefly, and Jason thought he saw a hint of something in the officer's look: guilt, awareness, or maybe it was just his hopeful imagination. Almost as quickly as their eyes met, Calvin averted his gaze and delved back into the conversation with the other officers, effectively cutting off any chance for Jason to speak with him. At least, for the moment. Feeling a mixture of frustration and helplessness, Jason decided it was time to leave. He walked slowly out of the church, his mind a whirlpool of thoughts and emotions. As he made his way home, his thoughts kept drifting back to Officer Calvin. There was something about Calvin's behavior that nagged at him, a subtle yet unmistakable flicker in his eyes that Jason couldn't dismiss. Was Calvin hiding something? Did he know more than he let on? With every step, Jason's mind replayed the events of the past summer. The secrets he had stumbled upon then seemed now to be pieces of a puzzle that he couldn't quite put together. Doubt clouded his thoughts, and he couldn't shake off the worry that had rooted itself deep within him. The more he thought about it, the more he realized that these secrets might hold the key to understanding what really happened to his father. That night, as Jason lay in bed, he found it hard to sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, his thoughts went back to that last night at his dad's summer house. That night changed everything for him. He remembered the things he heard and said, things that started all his troubles. The central figure in that night's events was Thomas, Jason's friend who lived just a few houses down from their summer retreat. Jason had never intended to get caught up in such a web of drama. Yet, it was Thomas who had set things in motion, his words a persistent whisper in Jason's ear, sowing seeds of thoughts and suspicions that Jason could no longer ignore. Ever since Jason was a little boy visiting the summer house with his parents, he saw Thomas as his summer break buddy. Thomas lived in an old white house just a few blocks away. It was a place that always intrigued Jason for its unique look among the other summer homes. Jason had imagined it being the residence of an old lady who never left, someone surrounded by mystery. He pictured her warning intruders with a creaky door and a whispering invitation. And for those who didn't heed her warning, she would chase them down, grabbing them by the hair to pull them inside. But the truth about Thomas's home was far less sinister. When Jason was sneakily peeking through the windows one day, he was caught off guard by the sudden appearance of Thomas, who, instead of scolding, greeted him with a wide grin and an invitation inside. The house, with its mismatched furniture and walls covered in family photos, exuded a warm, lived-in feel that immediately put Jason at ease. Inside, he found a place that was nothing like the scary stories he had imagined in his mind. Laughter echoed through the hallways, and the smell of something delicious always seemed to be wafting from the kitchen. Thomas's mother, ever so welcoming and cheerful, treated Jason like her own. When tragedy struck a few years later and Jason's mother fell ill, Thomas's family stood by him, sharing in both his care and his grief. When she passed away, Jason's friendship with Thomas began as an innocent summer camaraderie. Every year, when Jason and his family would arrive at the summer house, Thomas was one of the first to greet them. Their bond was born out of long, lazy days filled with adventure and the shared thrill of being young and free in a world that seemed entirely their own. As they grew older, the nature of their adventures changed, but the bond between them remained strong. They transitioned from boys playing hide and seek in the woods to teenagers discussing life's complexities. Jason valued Thomas's perspective, often finding solace in their conversations. It was a friendship that, in many ways, shaped who Jason became. In those summer conversations, Jason found himself opening up about Susan, voicing his discomfort with her presence in their lives. He confided in Thomas how he couldn't bear the thought of Susan replacing his mother. Those talks often ended with Jason feeling a mix of anger and helplessness, emotions he couldn't fully express at home. One night, under a starlit sky, Thomas shared a story about Susan that Jason couldn't shake off. Thomas revealed he had done some digging and found out Susan had a history of being involved with wealthy men. This revelation struck a chord with Jason, particularly considering his father's substantial inheritance. The idea that Susan might be after his dad's money didn't seem far-fetched anymore. Fueled by this suspicion, Jason and Thomas began to speculate more seriously about Susan's intentions. Their casual conversations turned into strategizing sessions. They knew they needed real evidence. They couldn't just guess or rely on rumors. They decided to come up with a plan to uncover the real story behind Susan's actions. Looking back, Jason realized those summer talks with Thomas were what started everything that led to this tough situation. Now, as he lay in bed, he felt the seriousness of what he had gotten into. To find out the truth about how his father died, he might have to deal with what he discovered that summer. It was a scary but necessary thing to do. Resolved to take action, Jason woke the next morning with a sense of determination he hadn't felt before. The doubts and fears that had plagued him the night before had crystallized into a clear resolve. He had to go to the police station and share his suspicions about Susan. It was the only way he could think of to start unraveling the mystery surrounding his father's death. After a restless night, his thoughts were clearer now. The connections he'd drawn, the pieces of information he and Thomas had pieced together last summer, all seemed to point in one direction. Susan. Walking into the police station, Jason's heart pounded in his chest. He approached the front desk, where an officer looked up inquiringly. "I need to talk to someone about my father's case," Jason said, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside. He was led to a small interrogation room, where he sat across from a police officer. The officer listened intently as Jason recounted the suspicions he and Thomas had nurtured over the summer, the story Thomas had told him about Susan, and the unease that had grown in him ever since. He was led to a small interrogation room, where he sat across from a police officer. The officer listened intently as Jason recounted the suspicions he and Thomas had nurtured over the summer, the story Thomas had told him about Susan, and the unease that had grown in him ever since. Then came the hardest part, the confession that Jason had kept secret, even from his closest family. With a deep breath, he revealed what he and Thomas had sworn to never tell anyone. They had broken into Susan's home that summer to find clues that might validate their suspicions. "We were hoping to find, anything that'd show she wasn't who she looked like," Jason explained, his voice tinged with regret. "I mean, we didn't dig up some huge secret, or whatever. But, just being there, sorting through her stuff, it was like peeling back this layer she wanted to keep hidden." Jason's voice shook a bit as he began, his nervousness showing. "For real," he said, sounding unsure, "I found, a bunch of fancy jewelry stashed away in her drawers. Stuff she never wore when my dad was around." He paused, trying to find the right words. "It's kinda like she was, hiding a part of herself, pretending to be someone she ain't." He hesitated again before blurting out, "Oh, and on top of all that, how in the world did she get those super pricey earrings, bracelets, and necklaces with just her waitress's salary?" Jason's question hung in the air, implying more than what was said, pointing towards the unsaid suspicions that had been haunting him. The police officer's expression remained neutral, but Jason could see he was taking every word seriously. Breaking into someone's home was a serious matter, and Jason knew the implications of what he was confessing. But he also knew that holding back any information, no matter how incriminating, wouldn't help in solving the mystery of his father's death. The officer's eyes narrowed slightly as he absorbed the information. "I understand this was not an easy thing to confess," he said slowly, "but it does add another layer to this case. I can see why you're concerned about Susan." Jason felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe his actions, however reckless, would help uncover the truth. "So, what happens now?" he asked, his voice laced with a mixture of anxiety and anticipation. The officer leaned back in his chair, considering his next words carefully. "Given what you've shared, we have enough reason to bring Susan in for further questioning," he stated. "While breaking and entering is a serious offense, the potential implications of your findings cannot be ignored. We need to explore every avenue to understand what really happened to your father." Jason's heart skipped a beat. The idea of Susan being interrogated by the police was both daunting and relieving. He had finally set in motion the wheels of justice, or so he hoped. "We'll need to keep your break-in under wraps for now," the officer continued. "It could jeopardize the investigation if it gets out. And Jason, I must warn you, don't try anything like this again. Let us handle it from here." Jason nodded, feeling a heavy burden lift slightly from his shoulders. He knew he had taken a risk, but it was a risk that might just lead to the truth. As he left the police station, the world outside seemed different. Maybe now he might finally find answers. What he didn't know was that these answers would come sooner than he had anticipated. The next morning, Jason found himself seated at the breakfast table, enjoying the company of his Aunt Crystal. She and his uncle had willingly taken on the responsibility of house-sitting for him, sparing him the loneliness of an empty house and the discomfort of sleeping somewhere that didn't quite feel like home. After all, she had assured Susan, he had been through more than enough already. Jason couldn't have been happier with this arrangement. The alternative, staying with Susan, had been a daunting prospect. Fortunately, he had managed to dissuade them from that idea, and his aunt and uncle had graciously stepped in to shoulder the responsibility. It was a relief for Jason, knowing he wouldn't have to endure the awkwardness and anxiety of living with Susan during this challenging time. But that morning, their calm routine was shattered when Aunt Crystal's phone suddenly rang, disrupting the tranquil atmosphere. Her initial response was casual as she picked up the call, but the shock in her voice when she uttered, "With who?" sent a chill down Jason's spine, and he instantly grasped the gravity of the situation. As the seconds ticked by, Aunt Crystal's distress became palpable. She paced anxiously around the living room, her exclamations of "oh no, and oh gosh no" filling the air. Her face twisted with disbelief, and she muttered, "This can't be true." 5 agonizing minutes passed before she finally ended the call. Jason was on the edge of his seat, his curiosity gnawing at him, but before he could utter a word, Aunt Crystal, her thoughts still in disarray, muttered in confusion, "They have brought Susan in for questioning." Jason couldn't contain the grin that stretched across his face. A rush of euphoria surged through him. Finally, he thought, finally they listened to him. The weight that had been pressing down on his shoulders for so long began to lift, replaced by a sense of hope and vindication. But he didn't know that this was just the start of more to come. Days passed, and Jason tried to keep things as normal as possible. He was anxiously waiting for any updates on his father's case. The days blended together, each one feeling longer than the last. Then, One morning, something happened that would change everything. He had just finished his morning run, still catching his breath, when he noticed something strange. The front door, usually closed tight, was slightly open. A shiver ran down his spine as an icy feeling settled in the pit of his stomach. He knew his aunt and uncle were both at work during this time of day. Summoning every ounce of courage, Jason took a deep breath and cautiously stepped inside the house. His sneakers barely made a sound on the polished hardwood floor. Directly ahead lay the living room, and the source of the rustling sound, now growing louder, drew him in there. As he inched closer, his heart pounded in his chest, the rhythmic thud nearly drowning out all other sounds. In the dimly lit room, a shadowy figure came into view, hunched over and rifling through drawers. His initial thought was of a thief, but as he squinted in the dim light, he discerned a familiar silhouette, a woman. And then, in a sudden, chilling realization, he knew exactly who it was. It was Susan. The shock of her presence sent electric currents through his body, fear gripping his chest like a vice. Why was Susan here? What could she possibly be searching for? Or worse, was she attempting to hide something? Perhaps concealing evidence of her own misdeeds? Jason's heart raced, and he knew he had to act. Susan's determination was unmistakable, her face a tumultuous blend of anxiety and purpose. Papers rustled softly, and the drawers groaned as they yielded to her probing hands, casting an eerie aura in the room. Jason's senses were heightened, and he even caught a faint whiff of his late father's cologne lingering in the air. Silently, he slipped back out the door, his heart pounding with urgency. He had to act swiftly before Susan became aware of his presence. Fumbling for his phone, he dialed 911 with trembling hands, praying for a rapid response that would bring an end to this nerve-wracking ordeal. His voice was barely a whisper as he relayed the situation to the dispatcher. "Please, come quickly. Susan's in the house. She's searching for something. I don't know what, but she can't find me here. Hurry." Within minutes, the sound of police sirens filled the neighborhood, a welcome relief to Jason's racing heart. The officers arrived swiftly, their presence filling the once quiet street with a sense of urgency. Jason watched from a safe distance as they entered the house, ready to confront Susan. The confrontation was swift but intense. Susan, caught red-handed, tried to explain her presence. "I was looking for evidence," she exclaimed, her voice laced with desperation. "Evidence that proves I didn't do anything wrong." Her eyes were wide, her hands gesturing wildly as she pulled out a notebook from the pile of papers she had been scouring. "This is Tom's notebook," she said, almost breathlessly. "He wrote in it when he was still alive. Look, here are clues about his cases, and one particular thing stands out." Her finger trembled as she pointed to a page in the notebook. Jason's eyes widened as he saw what Susan was referring to. There, in his father's unmistakable handwriting, was a detailed note about a certain napkin. The note mentioned a specific chemical compound, one that his father suspected was a powerful and untraceable poison. "The napkin?" Jason gasped, realization dawning on him. "The napkin we found in the coffin. It was part of Dad's investigation. He must have been onto something big, something dangerous." The officers, now fully engrossed in the revelation, took the notebook and began examining it closely. Susan, her demeanor shifting from defensive to cooperative, continued, "I swear, I came here to find this. I knew Tom kept detailed notes. I thought it might help clear my name." Jason, still reeling from the sudden turn of events, found himself torn between suspicion and the possibility that Susan might be innocent. Could it be that she was just as much in the dark as he was about the depth of his father's investigation? The complexity of the situation was overwhelming. "The napkin was found at a crime scene," Susan added, her voice steadier now. "Tom had taken it home to investigate further. He must have discovered it was from a restaurant, and he started asking around there. He somehow got an address linked to the kidnappers in a missing persons case he was working on." Jason's mind raced. His father, a seasoned detective, had been on the verge of a major breakthrough in a case. The pieces began to fit together in a disturbing puzzle. "So, the napkin. It was a clue to a kidnapping case?" Jason asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Yes," Susan nodded. "And Tom was close to exposing the kidnappers. But someone must have found out and stopped him." The officers looked at each other, the gravity of the situation sinking in. "We need to follow up on this lead immediately," one of them said decisively. "This could be the key to solving not just Tom's death, but also a major crime." As the officers prepared to leave with Susan in the notebook, Jason felt a mixture of emotions. The truth about his father's death was slowly unraveling, and with it came a sense of both vindication and profound sadness. His father had been on the brink of uncovering a major criminal operation, only to be stopped by a tragic and sudden end. The officers assured Jason they would keep him updated on the investigation's progress. As they departed, Jason stood there, processing everything. The morning sun shone through the windows, casting long shadows across the room. In that moment, Jason felt a deep connection to his father, a shared sense of justice and determination. He realized that his father's legacy was not just in the life lessons he had taught, but also in the pursuit of truth and justice. The investigation into the napkin and the address it led to became a high-priority case for the police. It was a race against the clock, as the missing person had been gone for a long time, and every moment mattered. Jason, while not directly involved in the investigation, stayed close to the updates, his heart heavy with both hope and anxiety. The breakthrough came quicker than anyone had expected. The address led the police to a secluded location where they discovered the missing girl, alive but in dire need of medical attention. The kidnappers, caught by surprise, were arrested on the spot. It was a major victory for the police department, and Jason's father's notes had been instrumental in cracking the case. The community was shaken but relieved at the resolution of the case. The story of Tom's posthumous heroism spread, and he was honored as a hero who had continued to serve justice even after his death. Jason felt a bittersweet pride in his father's accomplishment. He had lost his father, but his legacy lived on, saving lives and bringing criminals to justice. In the aftermath of the case, Jason found himself reevaluating his relationship with Susan. The turmoil of the past few weeks had stripped away many of their misconceptions about each other. Susan had been unfairly judged by Jason, and she had shown a strength and dedication that he had not seen before. Gradually, Jason and Susan began to form a new bond, built on the mutual love and respect they both had for his father. They talked more, shared memories of Tom, and supported each other through the grieving process. Susan, who had felt isolated in the family, found a new sense of belonging with Jason, and he, in turn, discovered a new respect and affection for her. Their relationship, once strained and awkward, grew into a genuine connection. They became not just stepmother and stepson, people who understood and cared for each other. This new bond was not without its challenges, as they both had to navigate the complexities of their past grievances and misunderstandings. However, their shared experiences and the trials they had overcome together acted as a bridge, bringing them closer. Jason began to see Susan in a new light. He realized that her actions, often misinterpreted as cold or distant, were actually her way of coping with her own insecurities and the challenges of entering a family still grieving the loss of a beloved wife and mother. Susan, on her part, acknowledged that her efforts to fit in might have been too forceful or misdirected at times. She opened up about her struggles and fears, allowing Jason to understand her better. Together, they started to create new memories, honoring Tom's memory, while also building a future that acknowledged their shared loss and celebrated their newfound understanding. They attended community events together, worked on projects that Tom had been passionate about, and even planned small trips to places that were significant to Tom and the family. As time passed, Jason found himself looking forward to spending time with Susan. Though the grief never fully went away, it became less raw and overwhelming. Their shared loss brought them closer together, and Jason began to see Susan as part of the family. She could never replace his mom, but she brought her own warmth and wisdom into his life when he needed it most. Together, they honored his dad's memory by embracing life, justice, and family. There were still hard days, but Susan was there to get through them together. And in her, Jason found the caring maternal bond he had missed for so long.